Right now, there are over 1 billion computers sitting in homes, offices, and schools around the world running an operating system that no longer receives a single line of security code. Not a patch, not a hotfix, nothing. And the people using those machines have no idea how exposed they actually are. What's even more unsettling is that the company responsible for those computers knew this day was coming for years and still managed to leave most of its users completely unprepared. If you own a Windows 10 machine, you need to understand what's happening right now, what it actually costs you, and why the solution most people are ignoring might be the smartest technology decision you've made in years. If you're new to Nolan Tech, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications because we upload new tech videos regularly that help you stay ahead. So let's get into what's really going on. Microsoft officially ended support for Windows 10 on October 14th, 2025. That date has passed. Your computer, if it's still running Windows 10, is receiving 0 security updates from that point forward. Every vulnerability researchers discover from here on out stays permanently unfixed on your system. Hackers know exactly which operating systems are unpatched. They track end-of-life dates like a calendar event. And the moment Microsoft stops pushing patches, those machines become dramatically easier targets. This isn't theoretical fear-mongering. It's how cyber-criminal operations actually work. Now, here's where it gets more complicated. You'd think the obvious move is to just upgrade to Windows 11 and be done with it. Microsoft certainly wants you to think that. But they quietly built a wall around Windows 11 using hardware requirements so restrictive that they effectively locked out hundreds of millions of completely functional computers. We're not talking about ancient machines running barely enough power to browse the web. We're talking about mid-range and even high-end systems that were purchased just a few years ago. The requirements Microsoft set for Windows 11 are genuinely strict. You need an Intel processor from the 8th generation or newer. If you bought a machine with a 7th generation Core i7 back in 2017 for over $1,000, Microsoft's official position is that your computer isn't good enough. For AMD users, you need 2nd generation Ryzen at minimum. 1st generation Ryzen chips, which were genuinely well regarded when they launched, aren't supported either. And then there's the requirement that catches most people completely off guard, TPM 2.0. That's Trusted Platform Module, a dedicated security chip that older motherboards either don't have at all or have disabled by default in their firmware. Even people whose processors technically meet the threshold are sometimes blocked because their TPM is sitting dormant in BIOS settings they've never opened. The result of all these restrictions is that, as of late 2025, Windows 10 was still running on roughly 42% of all Windows computers globally, nearly half. That's not a small group of people clinging to an old system out of habit. That's hundreds of millions of users who've been left in a situation where upgrading isn't an option. Their current hardware supports. And for those who technically could upgrade, Microsoft built a separate trap. For Windows 10 machines that don't qualify for the free Windows 11 path, there's the Extended Security Update Program. $30 per year to keep getting security patches for an operating system you already own. And that $30 only protects you through October 2026, at which point the problem returns exactly as it is today. For businesses, the pricing escalates dramatically, around $60 per device in the first year, doubling to over $120 in year 2 and nearly $250 by year 3. Microsoft is deliberately pricing organizations out of staying put, engineering a financial pressure system designed to force hardware purchases on their timeline, not yours. Which brings us to the hardware situation, and this is where things get genuinely difficult for anyone trying to solve this problem by just buying a new computer. The global market for PC components has entered a period of severe disruption unlike anything we've seen in decades. Every major hardware category simultaneously hit crisis conditions going into 2026, and the effects on consumer pricing have been staggering. Start with memory. DDR5 RAM, a standard requirement for most modern Windows 11 capable builds, saw a 32GB kit jump from around $90 in mid-2025 to over $400 by the end of the year. That's a price increase of more than 300% in roughly 6 months. DDR4, which older systems rely on, went from about $80 to $240 for equivalent capacity. These aren't temporary blips from a supply disruption that lasted a few weeks. These are sustained price increases tied to fundamental supply constraints. NAND flash memory, the component inside every solid-state drive, went through the same pattern. A 1TB chip that was priced at under $5 in summer 2025 had climbed above $10 by the end of the year. Kingston publicly reported their NAND wafer costs increased by nearly 250% compared to early 2025. The CEO of one of the world's largest SSD controller manufacturers confirmed that NAND manufacturers have sold out their entire production allocation for 2026, and new manufacturing facilities won't be operational until late 2027 at the earliest. If you're enjoying this video and finding it useful, take a second to like the video and subscribe to Nolan Tech. It really helps the channel and lets us keep making detailed tech content like this. Graphics cards entered their own separate nightmare. NVIDIA's flagship RTX 590 launched with an official retail price of just under $2,000. In practice, finding one in stock at that price has been nearly impossible. On secondary markets and through resellers, these cards have been selling anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000, with some listings going higher. Even last-generation cards that should have settled into reasonable pricing are selling 40 to 50% above their manufacturer's suggested retail price. Scalper bots are capturing GPU inventory in seconds, and even legitimate system builders are being squeezed. Some boutique PC manufacturers have publicly acknowledged they're being charged over $3,000 just to acquire RTX 590 units from distributors before they've touched their own margins. Major pre-built PC brands announced across-the-board price increases in late 2025, with executives openly warning that prices aren't expected to improve anytime soon. Put this all together, and the math becomes brutal. If you want to build or buy a Windows 11 compatible machine with reasonable specifications right now, you're realistically looking at somewhere between $1,000 and $1,500 at the low end for a basic productivity machine. Add a graphics card for gaming or serious creative work, and that number climbs to $2,500, $3,500, or more, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. Industry analysts tracking these shortages, project memory prices won't normalize until at least late 2027. And some forecasters think the full correction could take even longer than that. So Microsoft is asking you to either pay an annual subscription fee to keep an operating system secure that you already bought, or spend 2 to 3 times more than normal on new hardware during the worst component shortage in 30 years. That's the choice they've constructed. But it's not the only choice that exists. Linux has been available as a free open source operating system for decades. And for most of that time, recommending it to an average computer user came with a long list of caveats. You'd probably need the command line for certain things. Some hardware might not work right out of the box. Your favorite software almost certainly wouldn't run. The gaming situation was essentially non-existent. These were real limitations that made Linux a workable solution mainly for enthusiasts, developers, and people willing to spend time troubleshooting their own system. That description no longer fits what Linux actually is in 2026. The platform has matured in ways that close almost every gap that kept regular users away. The combination of that maturity with the current Windows situation has created conditions that make switching a serious conversation rather than a fringe idea. The first thing to understand is how Linux handles older hardware. This is where it has always held a fundamental advantage, and that advantage is especially meaningful right now. Linux distributions are designed to be efficient. They don't demand the same system resources that Windows requires, which means machines that feel sluggish running Windows 10, let alone anything more recent, often run noticeably faster and smoother on Linux. People are running modern Linux installations on computers from 2010 and 2012 without compromises. Machines that Microsoft has declared incompatible with Windows 11 become fully capable, fast-running computers with Linux installed. Your current hardware isn't obsolete. It's being artificially excluded. The software compatibility picture has also changed dramatically. For years, the argument against Linux for professional users centered on specific applications that simply didn't exist on the platform. Creative professionals needed Adobe products. Office workers needed Microsoft Office. These weren't preferences, they were genuine workflow dependencies. That gap has substantially closed. DaVinci Resolve, which is used extensively in professional film and television production, has native Linux support. For video editors, it's not a substitute for professional-grade software. It is professional-grade software, running natively on the platform. LibreOffice handles Microsoft Office file formats well enough for most practical use cases, and Google Docs runs perfectly in any browser, which means the document collaboration tools that most modern workplaces actually rely on work without any compatibility layer at all. The gaming situation deserves particular attention because it's the area where the conventional wisdom has changed most dramatically. Valve's Steam Deck runs on a Linux-based operating system, and Valve invested enormous resources in building Proton, a compatibility layer that lets Linux run Windows games without those games needing dedicated Linux ports. The results have been better than most people expected. The majority of the top games on Steam now run on Linux through Proton, including major PlayStation exclusives that received PC ports like God of War, Spider-Man, and Horizon Forbidden West. Native Linux game releases have also increased meaningfully. The idea that Linux can't be used as a gaming platform is genuinely outdated. Modern Linux distributions have also solved the usability problem that historically scared away non-technical users. Distributions like Linux Mint and Ubuntu ship with interfaces that feel familiar if you've spent any time on Windows. App installation works through graphical software centers that function like a phone's app store. Search, click install, done. You don't need to interact with a terminal. You don't need to understand package managers or dependencies. For basic computing tasks, the learning curve is genuinely minimal. For people interested specifically in gaming, a distribution called Bazzite has emerged as a particularly well-designed option. It comes pre-configured for gaming use cases, with Steam and the Proton compatibility layer already set up, and it's built in a way that makes it difficult to accidentally break your system through software updates. It's honestly a more streamlined setup for gaming than configuring a fresh Windows installation and then dealing with driver updates, software conflicts, and the various other friction points Windows introduces over time. There's also the question of what you're not getting with Linux, which turns out to be meaningful. No forced Microsoft account login required to use your own computer. No Copilot AI integration being inserted into your workflow without asking. No advertisements appearing in your operating system's start menu. No background telemetry sending usage data to servers you have no visibility into. No automatic updates restarting your machine mid-task because they decided now was a good time. Linux gives you a computer that functions as a tool you control rather than a platform a corporation is managing on their terms. The financial case is simple but worth stating clearly. Linux costs nothing. There's no license fee, no subscription, no extended security update program to keep your system protected. Security patches and feature updates are free and ongoing. You install it once and you're covered indefinitely. When you account for Windows licensing costs, ESU program fees, and the eventual hardware upgrade Microsoft will push you toward, switching to Linux could realistically save several $1,000s over a 5-year period. That's not a promotional claim. That's arithmetic. Major technology publications that have historically covered Linux as a niche interest have started writing about it as a mainstream option with genuine enthusiasm. A January 2026 piece in PC Gamer made the straightforward case that Linux is simply good now, without caveats, without the usual list of downsides. Multiple analysts covering the PC software market are calling 2026 the year where the combination of Windows 10's end of life, Windows 11's hardware restrictions, and Linux's maturity creates a genuine inflection point. This isn't hobbyist enthusiasm. It's a sober read of converging market conditions pointing toward a real shift. So what do you actually do with this information? If you're running Windows 10 and your hardware doesn't qualify for Windows 11, the most practical starting point is a dual boot setup. You can install Linux alongside your existing Windows installation and choose which operating system loads when you start your computer. Your Windows partition stays intact. You don't lose anything, you just gain an option. From there, spend a week using Linux for your actual daily tasks. Browse the web, handle your email, watch video, work on documents. For the vast majority of what most people do with a computer, you will quickly realize that the experience is essentially equivalent to what you're used to, and in some ways, noticeably better. If you work on specific professional software, spend a few minutes checking whether there's a native Linux version or a well-supported alternative. In most cases, you'll find one. If gaming is your primary concern, Bazzite gives you the most straightforward path to getting your Steam library running. Install it, connect your Steam account, and the majority of your library will be available without any additional configuration. For games that aren't yet fully supported, the ProtonDB website tracks community-reported compatibility for thousands of titles, so you can check before you commit. The situation that Windows 10 users find themselves in right now is one that Microsoft created deliberately through a combination of policy decisions, hardware requirements, and pricing structures. The end of security updates for a platform used by nearly half of all Windows computers globally, timed against the worst hardware shortage in 30 years, isn't a coincidence. It's pressure, engineered to push purchasing decisions. Linux doesn't eliminate every edge case or perfectly replace Windows for every possible workflow. But for most users, most of the time, it does everything they actually need, runs better on their existing hardware, costs nothing, and puts control of the computer back where it belongs, with the person sitting in front of it. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe to Nolan Tech, and turn on notifications so you never miss future tech videos. Are you planning to switch to Linux this year? Or is there a specific piece of software or use case that's keeping you on Windows? Let us know in the comments below.